All right, so to continue, we have here then, now consider that Google defines science as the intellectual and practical activity encompassing the systematic study of the structure and behavior of the physical and natural world through observation and experiment. Now, I don't want you to take from this example that you have to have some definition for a word that you're using to make the argument that your views compare or contrast in some way. But it makes sense for Daphne to do so because what is she trying to argue? That they have in common attention to scientific inquiry. And so she decides that, hey, let's go with an objective definition. I'm not just going to give you what I think science is, and I don't want to rely with whatever you happen to think science is. She wants to establish a definition of science using an objective source. So, of course, she lets us know what the source is, and she uses proper punctuation in terms of quotation marks around the word. Since she's not using it, she's mentioning it. In other words, the topic of this sentence is the meaning of the word itself. And then as you can see here, she has as. Technically, she should have a comma right here. I don't take off, like if you have like one little typo or thing like that. If you like in your paragraph, you have one or two typos, not taking off at all. If you have major issues, then yeah, like if you have two sentence fragments in one paragraph, then that becomes an issue. If you didn't use any punctuation, like no periods or commas or hardly enough, then yeah, you get points taken off. But notice again, a good introductory clause into quoted material. Make sure that if you're pulling definitions, that you are definitely putting quotation marks around them. And remember that if you paraphrase a definition, you still have to cite your source. Some students haven't done that in past assignments, and they've lost points or gotten zeros for their assignment for plagiarizing. Okay, so now you can see that she's getting ready to connect what she's already said and argued for back to the conclusion, because she hasn't said anything about science until she gets to this definition. Now, while she does give the definition, that's still not enough to bind what she's already said to her conclusion. If some students will do things like they'll stop their reasoning at this point right here, let's go to right here, right? And then they expect the reader, right, or the listener to figure out how their definition for, and actually let's go all the way to right here. And they'll expect the reader to figure out how this definition connects to what they've already said to make their conclusion. But it's not the job of the reader or the speaker to figure out how you're using some definition or some statement. You got to make sure that the reader, the listener, understands exactly how some statement you make in your paragraph, in your argument about your arguments, connects to what you're trying to defend. As such, Daphne exhibits attention to this expectation when she goes on to say, with this definition for science in mind. Notice that wonderful introductory clause, that transitional phrase that binds the fact that she just gave a definition to the fact that she's now going to use the definition. So even though she's using the definition, she does put the word in quotation marks because she's talking about the definition for a word, but she's getting ready to use it, and she does it here. It is not unreasonable for me to claim that we both use terminology relevant to science. The terminology having to do with protocols and sense making used by scientists. Now, honestly, she could go more in depth by talking about their specific words and stuff like that she's already quoted from. But for the nature of this assignment, remember, it's not a paper, it's not an essay as such. So she would be then going over too far, how many sentences I want you, or how much I want you to say about a given similarity or difference. So this is fine. Then she says, now the statement I cited above for my own response is only partial. The rest of it reads, but the results are almost always inconclusive. Here we see more terminology in my response that is typical of how scientists talk. Results and inconclusive. While I might not ever use the word science, so while I might not ever use the word science at any point in my argument like you do in support for your conclusion, I think that my combined use of test, studies, experiments, results, and inconclusive show that I was thinking of scientific inquiry and hence its specific protocols. So one thing that she could have done that she didn't do, which is maybe why she would get a 95 for the two things that I said, or for this right here, is that she doesn't make explicit that when she's talking about protocols, right, scientific protocols or inquiry, Oh, well, now she does say scientific inquiry right here, and hence its protocol. So no, that's fine, actually. Some other things that I want to point out to you here is, pay attention to how in each of the paragraphs, there's a lot of fluidity, coherence. There are transitional phrases, introductory clauses. I never, wonder why she's saying something she does at some point. It's easy for me to follow what she's doing from one point, from one statement, from one sentence to the next. Notice also her use of hedges. So she says things like, right here, she says, I saw this somewhere. Oh, it is not unreasonable for me to suppose, right? Here it says, there are some grounds for saying, it is not unreasonable for me to suppose. I think. So these are things that you can say. What I don't want you to say is things like I feel, because this isn't about feelings or emotions. Sometimes when people say I feel, they're really talking about how they think. And so just make sure that you say I think, don't say I feel. I like how she says here, there are some grounds. So she's saying there's some reasons. It's not unreasonable for me to say this. She's not claiming to absolutely prove something 100%. But so she's being cautious in her language. She's saying, I know that maybe I could defend more what I'm trying to say, that there could be more support. Maybe there's an objection to what I'm going to say. Maybe you don't agree with me. But I think there's some basis, right, for saying what I'm going to say. Okay, so also notice how she's speaking directly to the reader or the speaker. She's saying I, you, we, our. And while she's speaking in that person, notice how she's still sounding how she still has an academic tone to her writing. So again, remember, no texting conventions, no slang, no acronyms, none of that. Okay, so now let's go on to the next example in a separate video.